All right, for everyone here, we're now recording this meeting, so we will go ahead and begin. We do not, as of right now, have a committee chair, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. We'll begin with a land acknowledgement. I'm going to actually put the text in the chat. I'd be happy to read it, but before I do, I wanted to see if any of our council members would volunteer to read the land acknowledgement. Oh my gosh. If I can place it in a way that you can read it.
I can pop it in there too, Cord, if you want.
Yeah, it's doing that thing where it's like pasting in a very dark font, so it's illegible. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'll ask again, sorry, if anybody would like to volunteer to read the land acknowledgement in the chat.
I'd be happy to.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to acknowledge the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory. Oh, thank you for the map. And honor their ongoing relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we now call home. We recognize the continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and the subsequent bands within those tribes. And we thank them for continuing to teach us how we might all be here together.
Thank you. And thank you for putting that map up, Melissa.
That's great.
I think it's really helpful when we were able to share a visual representation of tribal lands across the state. I want to remind attendees of a few things. So one, the meeting is being recorded. When you speak, if you would please say your name, just makes it easier to identify the speaker. And just noting this is a formal advisory meeting of the state. If you are a member of the public and you wish to comment, there'll be a public comment section at the end of the meeting. You'll have up to 3 minutes to speak. If you'd like to participate in public comment, please send a message to Melissa Gallardo in the chat and she will get you set up for that. Melissa, would you please do the roll call?
Yes, I will. Thank you. So for our first meeting of the Policy, Rules, and Research Committee, Zan Ojero, Eric Cardella.
Here.
Parsa Chanrami.
Here.
Let me look across here. Celeste Janssen. Erica McAlpine. Diana Rojas.
Hi.
Hi, Diana. Karen Spencer.
Here.
And Liz Thorne. All right, thank you. Back to you, Cord.
All right, thanks. Looks like we have the agenda now up on the screen, so let's give everybody a chance to review what we've got on the agenda. If you have any questions, you can let us know. Otherwise, we'll pause for a minute and then we'll start with introductions for everybody here on the call.
It looks like Celeste joined us. Welcome, Celeste.
All right, well, I guess we can go ahead and start with introductions. Trying to think of the best way to do this because I can't quite see everybody. I think if everyone else doesn't mind, I will just go ahead and call on folks and try to get through this full list here. We can essentially move quickly through this. If you would please share your name, the organization you work with, or the sort of youth development role that brings you to come to participate in this meeting, and why you're interested in being on this committee. And I'm going to go ahead and ask our council members to do so first, and we'll start on my list with Eric.
Yes, so Eric Cardella, I'm a council member, have been for the last, oh gosh, I'll probably get this wrong, 6 years. I don't remember all the questions you asked, Cord, but I'm very interested in this committee just to really think about the long-term infrastructure of the council and the division, and to just make sure that we're continuing to, as best you can in the world of policy and rules, be resilient, nimble, kind of responsive to the needs of our constituency. And I think the last couple of years in particular have taught me a lot about how policies and rules and regulations and guidelines need to be looked at regularly in order to make sense. So I'm happy to be here. And I work for Oregon State University in my day job.
All right, thanks, Eric. Celeste.
Hi, everyone. I had another meeting scheduled and it just canceled. So I am so lucky and grateful to be here and spend an hour talking about policy and research. I am grateful to be here. My name is Celeste Janssen, and I am at a consulting firm that's a nonprofit consulting firm called Education Northwest. And I specialize in youth development just as my interest or field. I am always interested in making sure that youth development resources are around. And I think this is a really important pool of money that helps families and communities in a really specific way that is unlike a lot of other resources. And so I think I'm excited to bring the knowledge that I have and just the interest that I carry. But why I really want to be here is to help make sure that there's sustainability in terms of helping make sure that when the legislature says, why are we going to keep these funds around, that we have a compelling story to tell or data to share.
All right, thanks. Next, I've got Diana.
Sorry, can we come back? I'm eating my lunch real quick. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we'll come back after we go through the rest of the council and the staff to give you some time.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. It is lunchtime. I'll move on to Karen.
Hi, everybody. Karen Spencer. Let's see. I've been on the committee for a while. Has it been since 18 or 19? I can't even remember now. Anyway, I am a co-founder of a startup. I don't actually have a youth development credibility other than having been part of raising my nieces and nephews who were definitely at risk for a variety of reasons. And they credit me and my husband with helping get them launched as adults well. And I realized that it does take a village and a whole community for that to actually happen. My strengths are in the legal area and in strategic planning, and the policy work and research is so important to our strategic plan that I'm really looking forward to working on this with you.
All right, thanks. Parsa.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Parsa Chanrami here. I've been on the council for a couple of years, and outside of my role on the council, I work as the legislative director for the Coalition of Oregon School Administrators. This is actually my first time serving on the Policy, Rules, and Research Committee. I'm excited to be able to lend my skills and expertise here. In my other job as a legislative director at COSA, I spend a lot of time with legislation, with rules, and I'm hoping to help bring some of the K-12 experience from my job there into this work here to see where might there be opportunities for alignment, for synergy when it comes to rules and policy. What are some things we need to consider long-term when we're looking at investments and supports and programming? And then the previous committee I served on was the Juvenile Justice Committee, and I feel like that was a really valuable experience too, and just thinking about how are we continuing to connect with all of the different juvenile departments, especially in considering unique needs based on capacity around the state. and what supports we need to consider long-term when it comes to meeting everyone where they're at based on capacity and experience, because there's a lot that we can learn from each other. So I'm excited to be on this committee and spend more time on policy, rules, and research.
Cool, thanks, Parsa, and pardon my mispronunciation. I feel like I've heard it wrong and adopted the wrong one, but I wrote it down, so now I should get it right from now on. I think that is everyone in the council, and Diana will come back to you in a bit. So I'll introduce myself and then just ask the YDD staff just to provide a real quick introduction. My name is Cord Bucher. I'm the Deputy Director of YDD, and I'll pass it to Brian, and you can just call out another staff person and we'll go through.
Sure. Thanks, Cord, and welcome council members. And Brian Detman, Youth Development Division Director. Yeah, your introductions, Karen, saying, you know, as a member of the community, as a family member, I think that's critical youth development experience. I'm just going to use my little time here to make two very quick announcements. Well, I think I can be here for the whole meeting because the Juvenile Justice Committee is also meeting, but since this is the first meeting of this like revamped, reimagined committee, I wanted to be here. Also wanted to acknowledge, you may have heard Cord say he's the deputy director. That is new. I will spend not much time explaining, but he's going to be focused on policy and legislative matters. We settled on that title after thinking about policy and partnerships, but settled on deputy director. So that's what he is. And so that's exciting. And the other announcement, which I'll say again Thursday, but I just figure it's a good thing to share with folks. One of our staff members, who's actually not in this meeting, but it has announced her resignation. Sanji Moore has taken a policy and legislative manager director at this Oregon Office of Emergency Management. So Sanji's going to be with us for a few more weeks, I think until the 18th. It's not even a few, that's probably like 2 weeks, until March 18th, but then we'll start her new role at another state agency. So it's a great step up and forward for her, and it is a loss we will feel within the organization. I'll stop there. We'll replace the position and we'll find somebody who will not be Sanji, but will be capable and strong and fabulous. So just wanted to make sure that y'all heard that in this space, and you'll hear it again Thursday. I'll pass it to Bill.
Happy Monday, good afternoon. I'm Bill Hanson. I've been with YDD now almost, real close to 6 years now. Enjoy data, and even more so enjoy asking questions of the data. And that's my interest in being on this committee. And I'll go with Abraham.
Well, I'm Abraham Magana, and I think grant manager now 7 years, I think, of YDD this summer. So for a little while there. But yeah, I'm really excited about this committee. Just like I said, having been here 7 years and having gone through the various different processes of rulemaking and policies, and how much it really plays a huge role in our work. Oftentimes we say, well, what do the rules say? Let's refer to the rules, really kind of developing scope and okay, what's within, and asking questions help us kind of do our work, or how we work with other agencies, right? So it's really instrumental in the way we kind of, I know from my end at least, develop our grant processes. So thank you all. Is that it? Can't really tell who else hasn't gone.
Let's see if Paul can chime in.
Hi, this is Paul. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Paul. Thank you.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm Paul Sell. I'm the Re-Engagement Systems Manager. I'm actually calling in from one of our first site visits of the new year. So we're down in Tuesday right now. Yeah, looking forward to working with the committee as we develop these new rules, around re-engagement, as well as some of the new legislation that's moving forward. So I'll turn it back to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Paul. Diana, are you ready?
Hey, yes, I am. Hey all, buenas tardes. My name's Diana Rojas. I use she, her, ella pronouns. And I'm really like passionate about all type of youth work. I was a youth in the system. I was just thinking about this earlier today, actually, and I was lucky enough to, be able to make it out. And I'm here as an adult, trying to be an adult, navigating everything. So I'm really excited about just using my experience and being able to give back and help continue to pave the way for other first generations who, were also involved in the system. So yeah, just excited. And I'm always like, all of these are always just like a learning experience. And so I'm excited to be here and absorb it all.
Awesome, thank you, Diana and Melissa. I don't think you did an introduction, but perhaps you need none. But
Melissa Gallardo, executive support for YDD. I've been here a year and a half, and I will also, I believe, continue to be the support person for this committee. So I'm really looking forward to learning a lot with you as we go along. I think that's it for everybody.
Cool, and I see one name in the chat. I see a Kimberly Ferris. I just want to make sure it's not a council member on perhaps a misnamed account, but if you are a guest, you don't need to introduce yourself. Although if you'd like, feel free in the chat to just let us know where you're listening from. And with that, we can move to the next slide, please. And I'll quickly acknowledge Melissa has done an amazing job of helping me prepare for this committee meeting. I know she's played this role for other committees, so really appreciate all you do to kind of help make this stuff happen. So the first thing we wanted to do was just review the purpose of the committee. I think a charter document got shared, but that is something that I think will be a work in progress. But this is really just meant to be a list of all the things that we might be doing here. Obviously, the policy agenda of the council, which includes things like legislative work and legislative implementation. We want to talk about data questions, data collection, data analysis, advise or get your input and have you advise the YDD on legislative concepts or LCs and policy option packages. I'm going to pause right there. Something that we realized when we were working on this is that the folks participating may have like varying experience with some of these terms. So I'm going to quickly tell you what an LC and a POP are for either review or just in case. So legislative concept is draft bill language. So anytime we want to write a bill to change our statutes or to otherwise put something into law, the first step is to create a legislative concept. We originate that in YDD, but this committee would provide an opportunity for us to work to develop those. They go in very early. We've actually already submitted a legislative concept request for 23-25 session, but that will actually get developed further as we prepare for that next legislative session, and we'll be working with you on that. So legislative concept is just the bill language. A policy option package is where we ask for the money. A POP may or may not accompany an LC. So we would do a POP to ask for a position, a POP to ask for funding to make grants or do other program activities. A POP generally is new money that we don't already get. Go ahead, Celeste.
All right, thank you for allowing me to ask a really basic question, but when we as an agency put forward a legislative concept or put forward a POP, does it go to the governor's office and the governor carries it forward, or are we like allocated one or two per agency, or do they go in through ODE? I was just thinking often what, like I'm aware of how legislative champions might carry an issue forward through the legislature, but when we're doing it as an agency, like who does that come from, I guess?
So the initial steps go through ODE. So we, because of our budget being part of ODE's budget, in particular POPs, we work directly with ODE on. But everything ultimately goes through the governor's office and DAS to an extent. And if it becomes legislation, that is usually because the governor's office has approved it, and often the governor is the sponsor of our bills. So a recent example would be like House Bill 2051 for re-engagement was a governor-sponsored bill. Senate Bill 15 for compliance monitoring authority was governor's office sponsored. I don't believe that's the only way it can happen, but that's usually what happens, because we wouldn't have something go through if the governor's office didn't support it. I mean, I think there's probably a different discussion about bills that come through legislators and things that we as an agency or the council may be interested in, but aren't necessarily things that we initially have the green light to support or oppose. And that, you know, those sort of things do come up. So for example, Future Ready Oregon was an initiative of the governor's, so that one was very clear cut. Even though it was not a YDD bill, it was pretty easy for us to be able to support that. Again, we appreciate the council also stepping up and expressing their support for that. You know, but then something like, I'm trying to think of an example is escaping me, but there could be a bill that a legislator sponsors that we think is important and we want to see it pass. YDD can go and request permission to advocate for that bill from the governor's office, or to otherwise support the progress of that bill. I think that covers it. So I'll read off the last few things here, and then if there's something that you see missing, if there's something that you hope to do in this committee, I'll pause and would love to hear if there's things that we want to add to the scope. But we also want to work with you on reviewing and supporting the development of our administrative rules, engaging in legislative and budget testimony or letters of support. And then we see opportunity for work groups on specific topics. So policy areas such as re-engagement or workforce development. It might be that the work around data would require its own work group to really dig into that. When it comes to administrative rules, that could also potentially be something that a group might want to splinter off and work more deeply on. I think that over time we'll figure out kind of how those sort of more focus areas or work groups, you know, what might trigger needing something like that. But it is something that every committee can do, is to create work groups or subcommittees that would pursue an area of the work. I'll quickly, just for since I talked about POPs and LCs, Oregon administrative rules are essentially what guides our actual implementation of legislation. The easiest way to think of it is that the statute or the legislation is more or less permission to do a thing and a very general description of the thing that is to be done and how. The rules will go into more detail. For folks that were around with re-engagement, for example, the statute said that the council could make rules around eligibility to participate in a program or eligibility to receive funding. So then we would work on administrative rules to get into those details, and those are approved by the council after they go through a public comment process. And then we may get into this, but the things that, you know, once you have rules, then there is still additional policy work, which usually comes in the form of guidance we might give, you know, the processes that we use for actually making grants or collecting data. So there's still lots of work that happens at the level below the rules, but the rules provide us with that more detailed guidance. I am going to now pause. I see Liz has joined us, so I want to welcome her to the meeting. And then if folks see this list and there's things you want to ask about or add more to, please do. And Liz, do you want to introduce yourself before we get into any discussion? And you can just tell us name, organization, and why you want to participate in this committee.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me? Every time I come onto Teams, I feel like it's a new thing for me to experience. Good to see y'all. Hi, I'm Liz. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of Matchstick Consulting. And gosh, I am so happy to be on this committee. I have always, a lot of my previous work has been in the policy space. And so I'm eager to continue supporting the council's work on policy and I know this committee holds a lot, so eager to help support and advance anything that comes out of here. Good to see y'all.
Eric, I see your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
I do. Yeah, so I think, Brian, you might have mentioned that this committee is kind of reformed or envisioned. So Cord, could you or one of the YDD staff maybe share what the previous kind of scope of this committee or aspects of it? I'm familiar with some like policy briefs that various committee members kind of opted into. I don't know that that was through a particular committee, but maybe it was. But do you maybe speak to kind of like even some deliverables or some work that's happened in the past that might indicate what this committee will be involved in?
Brian, I was going to ask. Yeah, I see you turn your mic on, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I can say a little bit, and perhaps Liz or Celeste or others can chime in. I mean, we had a committee, and Melissa also could be helpful here too. I think it was called the Administration and Rules Committee, and it was focused more on the sort of operation of the council.
Yeah,
and it's guidelines, and in the nonprofit world you call them the bylaws, but in our world we call them something else. So that some portion of that, and also I think we brought to that committee kind of the administrative rules piece that Cord defined earlier. That is my general sense. It met maybe once. It has met once in my tenure, but it was fairly dormant. Was my sense, and yeah, that's my sense of it, Eric. I don't know, Celeste, Liz, others, if you want to fill in. YDD staff too, but I know we don't have a ton of time. But if there are a few more words, please fill in.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe one thing that I think was kind of interesting was when we were talking about restructuring committees as a product of the strategic plan. I guess two things. One is that so we had a workforce and re-engagement committee preceded by a workforce committee, and aside from juvenile justice, because there is so much work that the council members in that committee have to do as a matter of our federal requirements and the JCP planning, there was an opportunity with this committee to not sort of have a myriad of specific policy area committees, but to sort of talk about policy in a broader way here, and to have work groups that might focus in on an area where, you know, we want to go deeper on something. Let's say there's a new initiative or something emerging that we think we need to have more thought on. There's the option of doing that, but it was more manageable and also you don't want to say, well, this policy area is important enough for a committee, this one is not. There are definitely areas where we have not had committees, but there's really important work that we do. So I thought that was from Brian's sort of reconception of this, something that I thought was really valuable in the thinking there. And you know, I haven't put it on here, but I guess another thing that could be discussed here would be strategic plan. That was, I believe, a special work group of the council. There isn't really a specific committee for that, but I would guess that strategic plan discussions would be appropriate here as well, and how this all relates back to it. Parsa, question from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Cord. So I had a timeline question for just knowing that there's a timeline to submit legislative concepts and POPs for the different agencies and divisions very soon, right? And with a new governor coming in after the next election cycle, I wonder, like, how often would we revisit what was already submitted now after the election cycle, just in case something needs to be tweaked or adjusted? Is that kind of built into our timeline and process for review?
I think it can be. I'll admit that I do want to talk a bit about timeline when we talk about meeting frequency, but most of what I was thinking about was actually rules, because of the rules process and adoption, it's a much more compact timeline. As for legislative work, I do think that there will be an opportunity as we get to the 23-25 session, after the election, we'll probably want to talk about the status of our bill or bills. So we have one LC that we've requested. I believe we also have a placeholder LC where if another distinct issue emerges that we need to work on legislation to address, that would be the place to do it. And I think we will have an opportunity to talk about that post new administration coming in. I think we can go to the next slide, if you would, Melissa. Oh, great. So I have a summary here of just sort of the general ideas that we have in this legislative concept. That there is a little more detail to it, but what we have asked for in this concept is a bill that would actually expand the statutory description of the Youth Development Division and do some work that clarifies the role and responsibilities of the division vis-a-vis the council. So it would also make some updates to the council statutes where those two things need to align. Right now in statute, the description of the Youth Development Division is that we are directed by the Youth Development Director we are operate at the direction of the council, and the Youth Development Director supervises the division, and that's all there is in law. And that was written a very long time ago, and now the division has grown significantly. We do a lot of work, some autonomously, some with the council. So we feel like there's a real need to better address some of this. And I think I can talk a little bit more about that in detail when we talk about bill implementation. We also see opportunities to update our language around the description of gangs within our statutory language. We want to talk more about community violence, addressing root causes, youth violence as a public health issue. We just think that there's better language that we could be using. And so we'd like to actually craft something that is updated from what was put in there some years ago. There's also, I think, a need to articulate what community schools are and the scope and what it does. And it right now doesn't exist anywhere in statute. It is a very small amount of funding, which we're going to talk to the council about on Thursday. But we've had these grants since the Commission on Children and Families days. All the statutes referring to them have been erased and written over and reused for other purposes. So we kind of think that we might want to also figure out if there's a way to make it clearer what those community schools grants are and whether we want that to have a bigger scale in terms of our work. So these are some of the things that we're thinking about with this legislative concept. There's a few distinct ideas and there's room for more because all of the YDD and YDC statutes are fairly compact. We think that one bill that addresses a number of different sections of law is more efficient than asking for one on updating gang language and one on clarifying the division's role. We're just going to try to do it all in one bill. So if there are other statutory changes we want to make around the council and or division, this would be a vehicle to do that. And I think probably coming up in the next month or so, we're going to get into more work on actually drafting some language. But what we would put together would come back to us from Legislative Council, and we'd have more work to do in the fall to refine bill language. So there's still a long road to actually developing a bill, and more opportunities for us for the council, or rather the committee and the division to work together on refining that legislative concept. Well, thanks. Let's see. Parsa, your hand is up. Did you want to make another comment? I saw your note in the chat, but
no, I realized I forgot to lower my hand. Sorry about that.
It should be automatic. I think it's automatic in Zoom, but in here it
I don't think it's automatic here. Now I'm learning. Thanks, Cord.
And then can you go to the next slide, please, Melissa? This is
Hey,
information
Cord,
we
I
shared.
just want to, before you move
sorry,
forward,
Brian.
yeah, I just figured if anybody else had any questions or comments, it would be, don't hesitate. I know this group, you're not shy, so because I think part of what we're sharing here is that as a purpose, you will be able to look at these kinds of priorities. So these are examples, but they're like real examples. Like this is literally what we're doing. But this committee, Cord and I were talking like, well, let's use this opportunity to share this information since we can get it in front of you. But also as an example of the kind of work that this committee will have an opportunity to dive in more. So, sorry, Cord.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, this is just a list of some additional priorities we'd shared at the last previous council meeting. We can make this, I think we can make this slideshow available to folks if you want to refer back to it. I don't want to read this line for line. Could we jump to the next slide? Thank you. And these are just some additional things that we have coming up. And I think another opportunity here, if there's things you've not seen, there's things you'd like to talk more about in terms of the work of the committee. This is another chance. We'd love to hear from you about it. And then I'll pause and then I can kind of tell you more about some of what this stuff looks like. Well, I want to share a little bit about bill implementation because I think that there will be some work around a few of these things. So as folks may know, Future Ready Oregon, the governor's workforce funding real system revitalization proposals passed all the way through the legislature and is headed for her desk to be signed. That bill includes funding for an additional $10.5 million for the Youth Development Division to make grants. Essentially, the bill directs us to make grants to provide specific work readiness services. It's focused on youth who are in re-engagement programs, as well as teens and young adults who are not connected to school or work. So it could be youth who are in school, but really looking for those workforce readiness skills, job search assistance, paid work experience. The reporting, likewise, in the bill is all set. This is future ready, and I'll talk about Gresham in a moment, but an interesting thing has happened where we've started to get legislation that is directing the Youth Development Division to do work that includes making grants. As folks who are familiar with our statutes may know, the council has the grant making authority in statute. Most of our grants historically, the division will go to the council with a proposal for how we want to make grants to be approved by the council. The council approves that plan, and the division moves forward with that work. This is different because essentially the legislature says division, go forward and do this thing. But what we're thinking about are two things. One is when this happens, when the authority to make the grants is shifted to the division, how do we make sure the council, what is the council's role? How do we make sure that you are informed? We've discussed whether there's a need for administrative rules around this sort of thing. Whether is there a certain level of authority that should be delegated to the division? In the case of Future Ready and the Gresham funding that I'll talk about in a second, the Oregon Department of Education is actually delegated the funding and has the authority. The division is directed to carry out implementation. So there's just this new issue emerging around grant making authority. This goes back to that LC and the division's responsibility and role. So this is something that I think we'll want to talk about more in future meetings, how we make sure that there's clarity whenever there is work the division is directed to do and how we keep the council informed and involved in an appropriate way. Gresham, the East Multnomah Outreach Prevention and Intervention Grant is a really interesting case. So the city of Gresham lobbied for and successfully got $2 million from the legislature. They got it in December in the emergency session. The city of Gresham reached out to YDD back during the long session when they were pursuing this. We talked with the governor's office and essentially we were semi-neutral. We agreed that if Gresham wanted YDD to support the implementation of this, to essentially administer the grant, we're willing to do so. They felt like we were the best place for this funding to live within a state agency because of the youth development work around youth violence and gang prevention and intervention. Once they got the money, now essentially the legislation just says ODE give $2 million to the city of Gresham. And there is a note in the budget analysis that says the Youth Development Division actually has to do some work here, but this is one of those things where the legislation probably could have been clearer, but now we've got $2 million that we've been directed to give directly to a municipality to support them in grant making. And so this is uncharted territory for us. Again, I think that it is a thing where mostly we just want to keep the council informed. It's a different model of funding, very different from anything we've done previously. And so this is just a new development in terms of funding and legislation for us. So we wanted to share that. We'll talk more about it on Thursday, but I'll pause because those I think are both things that folks may have thoughts on. So.
I know we're limited on time, so I don't want to belabor it, but just Cord, can you speak to our? I know this is a new precedent of maybe funding or control management, stewardship provided by the division, kind of exclusive from the council. Is there an analog in another kind of venue with the state or through ODE? Or I'm thinking like the early learning division or other. Is there any other kind of like guide for this type of work, or are we in uncharted territory entirely?
Yeah, we're actually seeking that out.
Okay.
We've reached out to DOJ and ODE about both of these and had a few conversations with our assistant attorney general who reviews all of our grants and processes. Essentially, like one analog could be offices within ODE. So, for example, the Office of Indian Education has specific grants that it's told to make for specific purposes, and that office has some authority and direction around what it should do. Early learning is kind of an interesting one because they are now essentially becoming their own state agency.
Right.
They started asking these questions, and that's where they ended up. I don't think it was sort of an unintended consequence to an extent that we're not pursuing at this time. I think that we're sort of in a weird space because the Department of Education makes the grants and owns, in a sense, the budget that our grants are made from. So they have a role to play. The council still has the authority in statute to make grants. And so it is a little bit uncharted territory, but we're doing our best to identify some analogs to help us like think about some good ways to, if we need to develop rules, right, or improve our statutes to make this stuff clearer. How do we do that?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Hey, Eric and Court. This as an example probably only goes so far, but part of me also thinks about our juvenile crime prevention dollars, right, that we administer through a formula to counties and tribes. This happens to be a formula of one or something, right? Like it just goes directly to the city of Gresham, but by legislation, it goes to them. We aren't deciding to whom the money goes, right? And similar, in my view, as we think about the county and tribe juvenile crime prevention dollars, we have built over time some infrastructure, if you will, administration around, and in the legislation says each county and tribe must submit a plan, a juvenile crime prevention plan every couple of years, and there's some guidelines, right? So there's a little more infrastructure around that, but that to me is also just for those gathered here, and there's some parallels in my view to some of that the dollars in terms of give the money there, and then how you do it. There's less for Gresham, right? There's less detail certainly, but just a thought.
I see we've fallen behind on our agenda, so I'm going to quickly touch on these last things and see if, do we have any public comment? Anyone signed up for public comment yet, Melissa?
Not that I have seen yet. No, thanks, Cord.
Try to fit it all into the last 11 minutes. So just quickly on rules, we are planning on some administrative rule updates. We actually need to update our re-engagement rules to address the expanded age range and the clarifying language that got done in the legislative session last year around youth eligibility. I think facility compliance monitoring, we may need to work on some updates. I know there's a lot going on with our federal compliance guidelines and work we're doing to comply with some federal requirements there that may also require rules updates. We'll keep you posted on that. Data and research strategy. So there's the JCP crime analysis. We're having some additional internal discussions about expanding our work with outside evaluators to look at data from other YDD grant programs. There's a lot of work on data, I think, to be done that could potentially, and has in the past, it required its own committee. We should have mentioned there was a research committee actually up until a few years ago. So we may be pushing a lot, and this may be like a Scooby-Doo sandwich of committee purposes, but for now, we're going to see if we can also have some discussions of data as well. The two things we wanted to do with the rest of this time we have was, one, to talk about a committee chair, and two, to talk about a committee schedule or frequency of meetings. I've got a list here of the responsibilities for the chair of the Policy, Rules, and Research Committee. Are there any council members here in attendance, any committee members who would be interested in being the chair of the committee? If you feel shy about saying it, but you're interested, you could also, send a quiet message through other means. And if we don't find someone today, we'll just email you and ask you again if you're willing. The good news is that just in the same way that all this stuff was done already, that will also happen. You will still have the pleasure of YDD staff support, high quality slideshows, but there will be some responsibilities, as you see here, we will ask you to take on. I think you may nominate.
Well, I would never do that in a public meeting setting. It would be so rude. So.
I seconded. So is that a thing?
I appreciate folks thinking of me and nominating me, but I'm also going to be going on maternity leave in a couple of months. So I know, but I would love to support someone and anyone who is interested in exploring the committee chair opportunity. But I think for now I'll have to pass on it just because of a growing family and everything.
That's a wonderful reason to turn it down. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I will we'll come back to this question because we don't want to try to put pressure on anyone or rush. There's other ways we could co-chairs, I think, is a possibility. I think we've done that with committees in the past. So with the time we have left, I wanted to talk about meeting schedule. If we could jump to the next slide. I think the first question is, how frequently are folks willing and able to meet? Historically, committees, have met on a quarterly basis. Juvenile Justice Committee is meeting monthly. One possibility I was thinking through was around rulemaking, that twice quarterly meetings might be helpful in order to have a meeting to develop rules and then meet again after the draft rules are published to address public comment and finalize the rules before they go to the council. So essentially meeting once right after a council meeting and once right before it. A monthly meeting cycle would also potentially give us more room to talk about all the stuff we have on our list of purposes and activities. But I know that can be a big commitment to folks. So I I wanted to ask the committee members if you have thoughts on how often you feel up to meeting. Or how about this? If you don't, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in absolute theory land, I would opt for even a longer meeting that happens less frequently than an hour meeting where we're always kind of trying to buy back time, if that makes sense. So, you know, if it was between twice quarterly or monthly, I think twice quarterly hour-and-a-half meeting versus a monthly hour. I think sometimes it's easier to coordinate for schedules. Gives us time to actually dig into. We have a lot of scope. That would be my proposal.
You think in the past when we've done quarterly meetings, they were about 2 hours. I think that twice quarterly, hour-and-a-half seems like a good compromise because it gives us 3 hours of meeting time per quarter. I think there's also the possibility that if there is less to cover, we could always reduce, but I feel like we'll find something to do with that time, even if there are not rules, for example. Would other committee members, does anyone object to or just not feel like a twice quarterly meeting is something that would be feasible for them?
I think it's feasible. It's all about when it's scheduled. If I'm going to have another meeting that's going to overlap. And I don't know that there's an easy, like, oh, Fridays are always free, but Fridays are usually slower. So, but I think twice quarterly sounds great too. It's also more realistic, and quarterly just isn't enough time to capture everything that's going on.
I'm not opposed to Fridays. I feel like that for me is certainly a day when I tend to have more time. Are other folks' schedules similarly structured? Is if we were to look at a day of the week, Fridays, is that okay? Okay, well, I see at least one vote in favor. So I think that just given our time, what I would suggest is that we could come back with a proposal for a couple of different options for which Friday of which months we would suggest doing these meetings, and try to do some form of poll to figure out. Yeah, it looks like we say avoid the end of the month. I think that that's pretty doable. I did make some real quick notes for myself around like a timeline that made sense with the rules. So I think like an early April meeting, so beginning of April, following, for example, so I'm kind of thinking about a quarterly basis. I'm going to use the current quarter as our sort of way of thinking about it. So we'll have this council meeting coming up. That'll be in March. Then have the next committee meeting be essentially somewhere the first or second week of April. So the first month of a quarter, there would be a meeting. And then the second meeting would be at the end of the second month of the quarter. So they would be about a month and a half to 2 months apart. So we'd meet a few weeks before the council meets and a few weeks after the council or full council meets. So essentially we'd be going into the council meeting fresh with whatever the committee has done, and then coming to the next committee meeting with some recent full council business that we may want to talk about in addition to anything else. So the second meeting, it sounds like the end of the month is tough. So we could also look at meetings similar to this one where we meet right before the council meeting, like within a week or two of the council meeting. I don't think that would be a problem if that makes it easier for folks to schedule. And yeah, I believe the council meetings are almost always in the second week of the month. Mm-hmm. So I'll work with Melissa and we'll get something out to see if we can get a consensus on days, dates, times. And then my thought was to try to get us to a schedule for the next 2 quarters to essentially get into the summer. And then as we have a couple of meetings and feel out if our cadence and time allotment is working, then we can continue scheduling out. And if we feel like we need to adjust, we can do so. Cool. Well, I think in the absence of a new volunteer committee chair, I may still be the one to adjourn us. I just want to double check that we don't have no public comment, and then because we want to really respect everybody's time, I know we had a lot to cover and there's more to talk about. We can share information out and start planning for our next meeting. Is there any last words or thoughts from anyone here? Oh, and I see Celeste's comment. I will just note that I don't think we actually need a quorum within these meetings. The committees generally will not have to take any official action. If the committee wanted to make a recommendation to the council, then we would want to, at least get an informal consent of the committee that they all agree with the recommendation we would make. But the committee itself is not a formal body, where we would. Our quorum is essentially the council quorum, and we will never have a quorum of full council. So we won't have to worry about that, but thank you for noting that, Celeste. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate everyone's time. I know we just kind of I yacked at you all a whole lot. There's so much to cover, at least in terms of introducing the committee's work, but we will structure the future committee meetings so that I talk less and the new committee chair talks more. So again, we'll also be pitching that to you all. And I'm happy to support anyone who's even considering dabbling in chairship to make it awesome. All right, thanks everyone. Well, I believe this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.